back with some more Baptism by Fire by Multiman Publishing, part of the Battalion Combat series. Yes, good stuff. So a couple of points from the initial activation that I filmed, some very kind comments and some errors pointed out to me. One not major error, but when I moved this German camp group here through its at the end of its first activation, the HQ was a couple of hexes too far away from the infantry, and if I'd held it back a bit further in this area, then everything would have been in command range. So an easily rectified mistake. As it is, they got an activation and pushed on up over here, and they're now all completely legally set and everything. Well, they were legally set. It would have just cost the infantry a step reduction completely needlessly. So yeah, a couple of other things that I've kind of noticed. When Kern here retreated from Kern's Crossroads in the face of hostility by these, I've since realised, woken up to the fact that they're Tiger tanks. That says TGR. I thought it said TGB. I was trying to read it through the camera viewfinder, but obviously those are Tigers. When Kern retreated from those, I think he should have flipped to his move side as part of that retreat. I kept him on the other side. Again, not a big deal. And finally, I had a read and think about where the CCA combat train or supply train, whatever we're calling it, combat train, should have ended up. And I think it ends up here. I thought this medium armoured battalion would have forced it back further, but I don't think the zone of control does, so I think it stops there, because it started here and came back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then another 10 when this camp group ploughed through along the road. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and that's where it ends up. Great. So now we have we switch to American activations. The Americans have got a choice of two. They can do CCC up here. CCC are sat in an objective hex and don't have a great deal of troops on the boards, and it's fairly intuitive that CCA have more to do in this situation. So we'll activate CCA and then have a think about their options. So let's flip CCA. And get thinking about what they want to do. Before we think about what they want to do, I guess I should go back to the sequence of play and just ensure that I am going through this fairly rigorously instead of just pretending I know how to play and making it up. So we've flipped our initial activation. They could declare and execute fatigue recovery. No. They could try and create, maintain or remove a prepared defence, apparently. No, don't think they want to do that. Well, we're not going to do that here. We're going to try and do something else. And so they make their snafu roll. This should be interesting. So right now, there's no modifier for the game-specific rules. Sorry. So they're not fresh. Then they don't have a coordination marker. They do have a fatigue level of 1, so that's a -1. They no game specifics. They do have ghost trains on the board because their trains have been bumped, so that's a -2. I don't believe they count as crossing the streams right at the moment. But that would be an interesting question. Because if we look at where their combat train ended up, which is back there with a Kampf group in front of it, where are we saying their main supply route is going? If we were to check that now, we'd find their main supply route is actually illegal, because it comes along here and into a zone of control, which it can't do. So the main supply route is illegal. So I don't actually know what their main supply route is to get supply down over here. The Americans have a whole heap of trouble getting this HQ into supply. So let me dig around and see if I can find an answer to that, because they don't have a main supply route. And if they have to move this now, I thought they moved this during the activation sequence. So I need to have another read of these and see what's happening. Okay, well that was fairly easily answered by these sets of modifiers just below these ones, if combat trains are not legal. So as far as I'm concerned, this combat train is not legal, because as I say, supply would be having to come to it, and that is in a zone of control, and that is not allowed. So the Americans currently have an illegal combat train, which will have to be removed and replaced later in this turn, but for now that is giving them a big fat -3 on their snafu roll. -3. What were we on before? They've got fatigue of -1. So we don't apply the ghost trains because their trains aren't legal, so we just take this -3. That's a total of -4 on their roll. That's not looking good for them, is it? Let's give this a go. They've got a 5. A -4 gives them a 1. That is a fail. Fail means no objectives. It means no movement. It means they can flip from one side to the other. That all means very bad stuff. So let's see what that is going to mean for them. And I'm going to have a look at the board and come back in a second. So the failed snafu roll for CCA means that they are going to be doing pretty much nothing, but we still have to run through a few things, because this is going to go quite badly for them, unfortunately. So of the things that they can do, the first thing that they're going to get to do is try and get their combat trains, their supply, back in a legal hex. So their combat train is currently here in a zone of control, and that's bad. So let's say that we moved it back 1 hex, just for sake of argument. It's now legal. The supply route, though, down all the way over here, well, you can see that there's no roads coming down this way to bypass Sabitla and the German forces there. So our supply would have to be looping round through the desert here and back down across there. So we could then trace supply up here to this supply train, combat train. But then we'd have to try and trace something to our HQ, and that would be going up here. And then we're trying to find a track coming across here and down here, and then dropping this way and down here and down here and down here, and maybe, well, who knows, down there and down there and down there, blah 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 blah. And where's our HQ? There it is. Boom. So that is possible. The trouble with doing this is that if we are going to use any track or road or anything that this is also using, we're going to start getting penalties for using the same road. The ones I was talking about last time, where you're trying to truck your supplies along the same road as another formation. That starts to give you penalties on your snafu roll. If we could avoid that, that would be great. In this circumstance, I think we could probably find a different set of tracks through here to use. And the shortest track route is what we're meant to use, and it would be different for CCA, I think, although not necessarily, because their combat train is there and would have been tracing supply down here, but now isn't, and is instead having to trace supply up along that track there and up over there to their supply source, which is here. So that's all a bit complex, and I think, looking at it, although I can't look at it so well on camera, I think that it is inevitable that there is a section of track here through this Kef El Ahmar place down here, this section of track, that any two sets of supply lines would have to both be using. It's just unavoidable. There's a choke point here where suddenly they're both going to use one bit of track, and the only other option is for them to come all the way around here and trace around there, and that isn't going to work because that's not going to be the shortest. So that's that option. The other option we've got is to drop our supply source right down here, and this hex counts as a Allied supply source, American supply source in this scenario. Excuse me. So we could drop our combat train in here. Now I'm treating this the same way I'm treating supply sources on tracks for the Germans, which is to say you can drop your combat train on it, but you can't then drop your combat train anywhere on the track. You can only drop it on a secondary road. However, the benefit of that would be, for now, we'd have no problems in terms of crossing our supply sources and getting penalties from that, and we've got a nice clear line of supply then leading from the supply source onto this road and straight up this road to our HQ. So I prefer that option. So I'm going to pick up our American combat train, and for now I'm going to drop it in there. Great. And I can't put it on this road because this road would then, the only legal way to do that is if I could then trace from this road onto a supply source, not on a track. It would have to stay on a secondary road, and clearly I can't do that because this is a German supply source, and if I come up this way I hit a German main supply route coming along that road, and so on, and that's completely blocked. But I can leave it just in its initial hex. So let's do that. What else can I do with a failed snafu? Unfortunately I can't do any activities. I can flip things from one side to the other. I can move my combat trains. I could do a prepared defence, but we're not doing that. I can't place any objective markers. Okay, so we've got nothing else to do. We have to do clean-up. We remove all objective markers, traffic stop, temporary support, drop markers, and combat trains not in legal hexes. Well, they are. Unfortunately, now we have to do fatigue and isolation effects. And unfortunately, because we didn't get to move any of our units, we didn't get to move any of them within command range of our headquarters. So now we have a couple of units. These, and these are all exempt. But poor old Kern up here, who got shunted by the Tigers earlier, is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hexes away. So he's within safe. He's got a safe path because that is 10 hexes. But he's 9 hexes away, which is outside command radius. So he's going to lose a step, and he's down to 4. And equally unfortunately, this guy down here did not get to move, and he is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He is also just within safe path, and he is going to lose a step. So he is down to 2 steps. And that's really, really bad news. And that, I'm afraid, is the end of the CCA First Armoured's activation. And now they have something of a choice to make, which is do they want to try a second activation after that one? And the danger is that if they get it, they've still got a minus on the snafu roll, and they end up with another failed activation and more problems. However, they do now have their combat train and illegal hacks, so I think it's worth going for. They don't have to make a fatigue roll because they've not done anything that might incur fatigue. So this HQ we can have a second activation on a 5. So let's give it a go and see if they can reactivate and get anything done at all. So they need a 5. Ooh, that worked out quite well for them, didn't it? Okay, so they have reactivated a second time. I will flip their marker over to show that they've done that. Right. Now let's give them another snafu roll then. So this time round they are -1 for fatigue. They are -1 for having ghost trains, so that's -2. They are -1 MSR uses tracks. I think they've got that one as well. I think their main supply route, as you can see, comes along tracks. I think that's another -1. Is that? Yes. Yes, that is true. So they've got a -3 on this roll. And they've got a 4. They've got another 1. And that's another fail. And that's... we can do this very quickly. That's another step loss on these 2 isolated units. And that has just been an absolutely ghastly... that is the worst possible result that the Americans could have got. Absolutely the worst result that they could ever have got. To have made the activation and then rolled so dismally again. And they've just managed to inflict 2 step losses on 2 of their best units for absolutely no benefit at all. And that is the way it goes. This headquarters, and they've not managed to get into a good position. And had they activated, you know, I was thinking they could drop some armour back up to here, drop that infantry down, so they had 2 units stacked in there with infantry and armour supporting each other. And they could have retaken this crossroads. They could have withdrawn this unit back up this road into some nice terrain up here to try and screen Sidi Bouzid from an attack. They've got another armour unit in here that could have gone somewhere and done something useful. And you know, there was stuff that that CCA could have done. Ha! But it's brutally unkind when you get snafu rolls like that. So snafu lived up to its name. CCA completely fumbling the initiative, and now we move to a German activation. Well, okay, so let's have a look at this next German activation then. And with the roads being left open because the American command seems to be completely paralysed and they're not entirely sure what's going on, we don't have to worry about that. So we're going to leave Gerhardt here, his camp group, alone for a second, and we're going to switch down here and roll one of these camp groups. Yeah, one of these onto the map, and see how that works. So we're back to setting some objectives, or at least not setting the objectives, because that means we have to make rolls and do all kinds of things. But again, we're setting objectives in the sense that we want to look at this formation and say, well, what are we trying to get done with it? Let's assume we're using this guy, Shooter. So he's got 1 artillery point on his HQ, that one in the flash. He's got some decent armour, an armour battalion, AR5, 2 red, and he's got some backup medium armour. I wouldn't like to guess what type of tanks these are. I mean, if this really super hard stuff up here are Tigers, you're kind of guessing that these are some sort of Panzer IVs of various varieties, aren't you? But I'm not quite sure what they'd be. And the World War II sort of equipment aficionados will have way more accurate guesses than I would. And then he's got some motorised infantry with 3 AR on this side, 4 on the other, and his combat train. So again, he's only got 3 actual combat units to use, but we'll see what we can get done with this. So if we look here, we're going to be coming on in G, and that means our supply is going to be dropped down here. And if we look up here, clearly having a red AV unit kicking around right next to our supply lines is going to be painful. The fact that he's now just taken two step losses from attrition means that he's got 1 step left. So what I'm hoping is that we can just swing a tank straight in here, up here, engage him and blow him away and be rid of this nuisance. The other thing is that if our supply's coming on here and then presumably up this track somewhere to an HQ, this unit here in the mountains has to be dealt with, because he's controlling this track, which we're going to need to get supply up towards Sidi Bouzid, unless we're going to come all the way over in this direction, which doesn't seem very efficient. So what we want to do is get rid of that and then lay siege to this guy in the mountains and eliminate him. I want him gone, so that we can then open up our approach to our main target here. So that is what this camp group is tasked with with for now. So let's see how this goes. So we're going to flip his HQ to show that we're activating him. Okay. Drop his combat train, supply train, I never know what to call them, but you know, that thing in there. HQ in here. These guys are fresh, and their activation marker over there. And we'll drop back to the sequence of play and see what we're supposed to do. It's becoming a little bit more intuitive, but we do preparation. We don't want to do any fatigue recovery. We don't want to do any prepared defense. So we're going to make our snafu roll and see whether we can do a little bit better than the Americans. We're getting a +1 for being fresh. We are getting +1 for the first turn, and it's game specific. We're getting +1 for optimal distance on our trains because they're on an entry hex and we're not 15 or more hexes away. We're on +3, and we've got a 3. A 3 + 3, that's terrible. That is only a partial snafu. That is terrible. So, great. Wow, you're getting to see. We're getting to see absolutely everything here. Failed snafus, partial snafus, the whole works. So that means we've got one objective. We know from experience that we don't need an objective marker to rock up to this guy and blow him away with some armour, which is what we're planning to do. And we know that we will need an objective marker in order to drop fire assaults and artillery barrages on that guy. So what we'll do is put our objective in there like so, but we can't double up on the objective, which means, you know, we won't get that bonus. Okay, now from here, let's come over to this table. One objective. We're going to be working with half our normal movement points and half our normal artillery points. I'm going to have to check. No, I'm not. I know that everything rounds to the nearest, so halves become 1. So I think we're still going to have an artillery point, but we can still do all our attacks and everything. So we're just moving. We're essentially doing what we could with a full, but we've only got half movement and half artillery points. So I'm going to have to go away and think about, just double check that these guys are going to have the movement points to do what they need to get done. And the quick answer here is no, they are not going to have the movement points to get what they need done. They're on half movement points, but they've got to do some stuff anyway. So firstly, let's roll some tanks onto the board and see if we can't rid ourselves of this nuisance. So from here, these guys are rolling up here. 1, 2. They are now in an AV zone of control, and actually, hold on a second, that screen token on this guy does some interesting things. So let's give the Americans all the help we can, because they don't get many advantages here. Well, they don't get any at all. So so these guys are not using their deployed side, And what this screen therefore means is that any hexes within 3 of them cost an extra movement point to enter. So, yeah, they're just finding it tougher to do this. So this open now becomes 2, 4. And now they're in an enemy zone of control, red MA, and they're going to announce an engagement with this unit. These guys have 1 + 2, 3. These guys have 7, so they're at +4 on the engagement table. Let's pull that table out. See how it goes for the Americans, and with the dice that we're getting at the moment, who knows what's going to happen. So it's not a double objective zone, not limited AV, no multiple supports, it's a straight +4. Wow. Two plus 4, that is a 6. Okay, that's normally a both lost result. However, the screen, as we said before, converts any both lost results into target must retreat, no losses. So, because he's screening, he's not taking a loss. Actually, the Germans probably wouldn't have minded a loss there, because they could have taken their loss and this guy would have blown up. So he is going to continue screening, and I think he is going to retreat 3 hexes towards his HQ. And he's happy retreating back across the desert, so he will come 1, 2, 3 up there, keeping his screening marker on him. And that was 4 movement points for this guy. Is he allowed to keep the screening marker? Let me check. Okay, yes, he's keeping the screening marker. So we continue from here, and this guy's moved 2, 4, 6, and is now out of movement points because he's... Sorry, 2, 4... What am I talking about? 2, 4... 6, yeah, because that's got a +1 because it's within 3 hexes of this guy, and he hasn't got 2 movement points to advance any further, and he's stopped there. That was very unsuccessful. Okay, so let's see what we can do here. So let's roll some armor up this road. 1, 2, 3, 4, and he's not in this guy's screening zone. 5, 6, 7, and that's his half movement points, and that's as far as he's going to get. Let's do the same with some infantry. Infantry on track. Is it halved? Track? No, it's 1 point. 1 point for truck movement. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Okay, let's roll our Let's roll our HQ up a little bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And maybe this is extremely silly. Who knows? But I want to drop some artillery fire onto this infantry, if nothing else, because we've got a point of artillery that we can use. We've got spotters with a clear line of sight through to him in the mountains here. So I'm assuming, this guy can see him, and therefore that our HQ can drop artillery into him. He's within our HQ's command range, so we want to use our artillery point to try and blow him up. And we would love to have done that with this guy, and we've got a clear line of sight here, but this screening means that we can't get a bead on him for an artillery barrage. I would much rather blow that guy away with our artillery, but we cannot be targeted by the combat results table. So we can't be targeted by some sort of assault, he can't be targeted by any sort of assault, and he cannot be targeted by barrage. Okay, Mr. Infantry, it's not your lucky day. Let's drop some artillery on you. And as far as I'm aware, this is pretty straightforward. This is a die roll on a barrage table. And it's a 1d6 roll, and he is in some sort of terrain, so we will inflict a step loss on a 4, 5 or 6 on a d6. And that's it. Yeah. So we're just rolling on this table here, and let's grab a dice. Okay, that's a 5, and that, I'm afraid, Mr. Infantry, is a step loss on you. So he was 4 steps. He's now 3 steps. Make sure we're putting that in the right place. There we go, under there. Okay, so we've managed to drop some artillery into him and shake him up a bit, and that's us done for our activation pretty much. Our combat train's in a pretty good place. Well, relative to our HQ, I think we've still got ideal distance between the two, and so we've pretty much used all our units up. They couldn't fight, they couldn't get to anything to fight, apart from this guy who failed dismally, and the HQ who put a point of artillery in. Great. So now we go back to our sequence of play. We're going to roll to see whether we are fatigued. We remove all objective traffic stops and temporary support dropped markers, so the objective marker comes off this guy, and I'm just running out of battery, so I'm going to have to stop here. So as my camera ran out of battery, this Kampfgruppe shooter had just inched onto the board very cautiously after a very, very poor snafu roll. Well, they managed a continuation roll, and you can see from the situation here that they were far more decisive in their second activation. They got a full activation. The armour unit here, which had been toying with or been screened by an American armour unit, approached it, shot it up, and then swung round here behind an infantry unit that was in here and put some fire into that as well. Another armour unit came up and put some fire into that infantry, which was getting whittled away, and then the infantry came up and assaulted it. We could have actually moved the HQ up and put artillery fire in as well, but didn't feel the need the second time around, because I was wondering if the HQ might to swing round in this direction and start putting some shells into here, but that all seemed very dangerous. Made a fatigue roll, didn't get fatigued and stayed fresh, so that was all very successful for the Germans. So the story so far, to recap, is that Kampfgruppe Riemann here have used their Tigers to force their way along this road, completely open the road up, and seize control of Sibitla. Combat Command A has just been panicked by sudden loss of their supply, news of Sibitla being overrun by German tanks, and they have essentially frozen, paralysed, not quite knowing what to do, and that indecisiveness and paralysis has cost them sort of morale and fighting spirit amongst the sort of outlying divisions. And on the southern side of the Sidi Bouzid, those outlying divisions have just been overrun by another German Kampfgruppe. Great. That's all telling quite a nice narrative, let's be honest. That's telling quite a compelling story about what's going on, with this kind of command paralysis, and it should also, we could also say that this Kampfgruppe shooter, perhaps expecting, greater resistance, came on, approached very, very cautiously. They only had half movement points. They were screened effectively by the German tanks, but then, having realised how little there was in the area, they got their act together and assaulted and overran the American positions. So that is where we are. The Americans now have CCA to deal with, and CCA are in just a horrible spot. There is no good news for the Americans at the moment. They are holding an objective hex, which is a good thing for them. However, their combat train is not in a legal spot because these German troops cut the road, which leads to their two supply sources, one up there, one over here. So their combat train, supply train, is not legal, and that's going to give them a horrible modifier when they roll their snafu roll. So that's all going to get very painful. One thing that has been pointed out to me is that when these German troops entered Sibitla, to do that, they needed an objective marker in the victory point hex. It's a special rule in this module in baptism by fire that to enter a victory point hex, you need to have an objective marker on it. Now, in this instance, that doesn't matter because they were just rolling up the road. But were you trying to fight your way in somewhere, you couldn't have a double objective on something that you were trying to fight past and then go into the thing that you were trying to assault, because you'd need another objective marker to get in. So were they trying to fight their way through an American unit here, they put a double objective on it, they couldn't get in, so they'd need an objective there and an objective marker on the city. Here, the only thing that means is that the Kampfgruppe would have needed to put an objective marker down during its second activation, and what that means is that at the end of that activation it needs to make a fatigue check, and it will get fatigued on a roll of 1 on a d6, and it does not get a roll of 1, and so we've now amended that, or corrected that error, and we're ready to move on with Combat Command C in a world of trouble. Well, despite their supply problems, the Americans did roll well enough to have an activation, to make their snafu roll, pass it successfully. So Combat Command C has been able to do something, but they've got so few units that there's not a lot they can do, but they've just split up, left their armour guarding this Hajeb al Ayun, pulled some infantry out to guard that crossroads and withdrawn their headquarters up this track and shifted their combat supply trains back onto the road at their supply point. So that's them done, and now we've got two German activations to do. We've got this camp group here, Stankoff, who will be coming on there, and Gerhardt, who's coming on somewhere up over this side. And we've got to decide what to do. Again, I think what we want to do, if we look at Stankoff here, he's got two artillery points, and that looks like quite a good place to shell. So I think what Stankoff really wants to do is come on board, if possible, roll up here, get some armour in here, which will have to engage because it's mandatory. If you roll armour into an armour zone of control, you have to engage. So there'll be an armoured firefight, and actually this guy with 6 armour, this guy with 6 is almost equal to our armour. They've got 7. If we flip them over, they've got 8, but 4 movement points won't get us anywhere close. So if we're going to get up there, we're going to need to use the 7 side. And the reason we've got to do that is because these palms will block the view of the village, and we'll need to be right up adjacent in order to be able to spot for artillery strikes. So we're going to try and roll through here, up there, engage with our armour, and then drop some artillery in and see where we are after that. The other thing these guys have got are some 88s. They've got this Luftwaffe unit with some 88mm anti-tank gun. Brilliant, these fearsome 88s. And these have got a standoff rating, which means that when they're in support, they can things they're supporting, like for example this infantry, can then use these to initiate combat, and they're 4 rating. That's pretty fearsome. So yeah, I haven't explained that very well, basically, and they won't be able to go into support this turn because it's not allowed. Support's not allowed on turn 1, I don't think so. But they might want to think about getting this infantry up somewhere close, so that it can then, like here, so that it can then at range 2 use the 88s to pound whatever's in here. And that seems like a really good plan. So I need to set all this up. I'm not going to do it on camera. Haven't described the plan. I'll get it done and then show some results or some die rolls as it happens. And this is the position I reached at the end of turn 1. This camp group here, Stenkoff, carried out its plan, put a double objective on Sidi Bouzid, moved its armour up, and engaged in a firefight with the American armour, which caused casualties or damage on both sides anyway, bearing in mind what I said earlier about the step loss model. But anyway, there was some damage on both sides, engaged again and forced them to retreat, and the Germans were kind of kicking themselves because they'd been hoping to drop a load of artillery. That was the plan. They thought they'd go for a second engagement, and the retreat moved these guys back down the road. So the Germans moved up and took the town with their recon unit and moved the rest of their camp group up as far as they could get. Attempted to get a second activation and failed. And then they just had Gerhardt left, who took up positions on this highway to take control of the major sort of junctions, here with his infantry watching those infantry, and here with his mechanised infantry in HQ, and up front with his armour watching Kern here. but then tried to get a second activation and failed. So that was it, and that was rather wasteful because I could have dropped an objective hex on Kern and then tried an artillery bombardment. I don't know how many artillery points Gerhard gets, just the one, but that would have been better than doing nothing, but I completely missed it, and I'm not taking it back now. Anyway, pretty successful first turn for the Germans, pretty disastrous for the Americans, and I'm really enjoying the game. It is great fun. I think it seems to be very much a learning scenario. I'm not sure how much of a fight the Americans are due to put up, although they have had abysmal luck they did have abysmal luck with their snafu rolls with Combat Command A, and I suppose it can all be very different if you get a terrible roll with the Tigers rolling up this road and they get stopped, and then and you don't make this ground and cut those guys out of supply and so on. So there's been a kind of snowballing effect, which also is extremely plausible. So fantastic stuff, really enjoying it, and I'm going to stop here. Well, with the videos anyway, not the game.